How you all doing? Glad to see lots of you are bang on time here. I'm going to give it a couple of seconds for all the attendees to flow in here. If you're coming along to your second one of these sessions, thank you. Welcome. Hope you enjoyed the first one. I will kick things off in a second and introduce the rest of our speakers. But for any of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Carey. I'm the editor-in-chief here at Lead Dev. I'm going to be hosting this session with Dan and Alex and Matt, who you will recognize from the first session if you were there. I am coming from Manhattan, New York. We've got Lead Dev New York kicking off tomorrow, Wednesday, and then leading edge on Friday. I'm doing this from my hotel room, so apologies if anything is slow. Hotel Wi-Fi, famously not the most predictable, but I'm really excited to be here. The Augment team are going to be on site this week, so it's going to be a really fun week. But before we do that, what we're here for today is the second session of our Augmented Engineering in Action series. The point of this series is to give all of you folks an insight into how other engineering organizations are adopting AI tools, specifically for this session, how they're evaluating them and improving them, and then finally kind of really showing us what they've been doing behind the scenes and giving that insight into like the real nuts and bolts of these projects and using this relatively new set of tools that everyone is becoming really, really excited by. And so before we get into the content here, I just want to say hi to Dan, who is just across the Hudson from me, and Alex. Dan, do you want to say hi and just tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Scott. My name is Dan Van Tran. I'm the CTO of a company called Collectors. You may recognize some of our brands, notably PSA, but also we own PCGS, which is for coins, WADA for video games. The PSA, our trading card brand, is the most notable one. So the company's actually quite old. We were founded in 1986. I joined around 2021 when the company was acquired to bring it from public to private to rebuild the technology stack. So, as a company, what we do, our main business is grading and authenticating collectibles. So people actually send in trading cards or drop them off, and coins and video games and comic books and magazines, and we actually intake it, determine the condition, give it a grade, make sure it's real, encapsulate it, ship it back. Now, the problem they ran into in 2020 was that during the pandemic, there was a huge surge of interest and activity, and a lot of people were sending things in droves. Notably, the U.S. Postal Office in the headquarters in Santa Ana had to shut down, and they made us actually rent school buses to funnel all those packages back to our headquarters to grade. And so it was a wild time. We ended up with a 12 to 14 million card backlog just prior to the acquisition. And a lot of this was due to the operations and the technology not being really up to snuff. So I joined around that time when the company was acquired. There were 22 people in the tech organization, 11 software engineers, but they owned over 300 web domains, a dozen mobile apps, dozens of products and applications. The company itself was nearing 1,000 employees, but they had no product team, no data team, no platform team, et cetera. And so there's quite a lot of growth. And part of what we are here to share today is how we leverage some of these AI tools to help to accelerate some of that growth. So you fast forward to today, we're now at 220 plus engineers with 25 people in our product and design organizations. We can now grade one and a half, upwards of 1.5 million cards a month, trading cards alone, thanks to the leveraging technology and these AI tools. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about our story. I'd like to hand over to Alex to introduce himself as well.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. So yeah, I'm a staff engineer here at Collectors, working primarily on the coin grading side of our business. And I come from a diverse background, working at really companies of all shapes and sizes and in many different industries, both in IC and management roles. And I have a particular interest in building engagement within engineering teams. And now, of course, I believe AI has a big role to play in that. So that's why I'm here alongside Dan, just to talk through our thought process around AI tooling at Collectors.
Yeah, nice. Alex is obviously underselling himself. He's been doing some awesome work in the background in terms of how you evaluate these tools, and he's going to really show us how he's been thinking about that stuff a little bit later on. Um, And then Matt, do you want to say hi again? Tell us a bit about
Yeah, for
yourself.
sure. Super excited to be in one of these conversations again, and also the event this week. Yeah, I started my career as a software engineer in a professional services setting, actually, so very customer facing. During that time, I really came to find that my passion was in developer tooling. So nearly the last decade now, I've been working in developer tools. Naturally, one of the things with the developer tools is, well, how do you measure them and understand their value? So today's actually a really interesting conversation in that respect.
Yeah, I think there'll be plenty of folks out there that are kind of still grappling with this. It's still early. How do you start to run kind of tests of these tools against each other? How do you evaluate what they're good at, what they're not so good at? And then that engagement piece, Alex, you talked about, how do you get engineering engagement? How do you kind of turn that? How do you kind of professionalize that from the playing around stage to the professionalization of it? We're going to get into all of that. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. Dan, my main takeaway there was that in the pandemic, we had way too much time on our hands. And I kind of weirdly miss that ability to just kind of like dig into our collections and kind of start to think about that stuff. Now it's not so big a problem, but obviously that posed a real challenge for the business. And I think the at the time, the AI tooling space wasn't where it is today. We had AI, but we didn't have this kind of generative AI boom that we've been seeing over the last couple of years, really since ChatGPT came out. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like when did you start to see this kind of AI wave cresting, and what was the moment where you were like, oh, this could be a real game changer for us. This could really help us like take a bite out of that nasty backlog we built up over the years.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we, especially coming into it, I knew that AI would be a huge component of the solution that we needed to apply in order to modernize the company. Just to share a quick story, before I took the role, I wanted to know what I was getting myself into. Hearing that there's this backlog and lack of technology and not really many engineers, I was like, okay, so how hard is this going to be? So I went on a tour, and the CEO invited me to just see how the operations worked in the back end. And so as I'm going through each one of these phases, I could see the opportunity to apply various aspects of technology. One of the first things that hit me was you start in the mailroom and they walk you through the whole process, almost like it's a assembly line. So you go to where all these packages are coming in, and I just remember from floor to ceiling just seeing boxes. Couldn't even see people. It's just all boxes in this IKEA type warehouse, this Amazon warehouse. There's just no people, just boxes. I was like, wow, this is the backlog. Um, and just that alone, I could see like, well, we could apply some robotics in order to process these, and they all had barcodes on them. And as you went through the process, you could see like, well, we could apply AI here. We could apply some more automation here. And so it started in my mind to form this 2 to 5 year roadmap. Um, and I knew that part of that was ultimately building some form of AI and automation. So I did start building out an AI team from day one, knowing that the technology wasn't quite there, but we needed to start R&D and to really articulate where we were going to apply AI, what were the problems we were going to solve, and how we're going to solve them. And fortunately, there were plenty of other problems to solve, given that at that point it was a 35-year-old company, and they were still using spreadsheets and post-it notes. So there was a lot of just like rudimentary technology that we could build while we were letting both the AI plans kind of cook a little bit, but also letting the industry catch up in terms of generative AI and a lot of the open source libraries, et cetera. And so a couple of years in, things started to finally catch up. And so you're around 2022, 2023, we were able to start adopting a lot of these open source libraries and building a lot more of the computer vision and a lot more of that automation. And so now today we actually have quite a lot of it set up in terms of the operations itself. But then the next thing that we need to look into was, okay, that's great. We still have now at this point closer to 40 years of tech debt in terms of code. A lot of the original source code was actually built in VB.NET, which hopefully none of you are actually experts in. This is actually my second company that specializes in VB.NET, unfortunately. But so we need to modernize that quickly, understand it and modernize it. So that's when we started looking into various tools, and Augment was actually one of the first that we actually ended up looking into because a lot of the way that the team worked in terms of their IDE, their workflows, there's actually they were very set in their ways, and we didn't want to really disrupt them too much in terms of their velocity and everything else. But Augment actually allowed you to use the ID that you're comfortable with. And it actually, more importantly, especially around that time, it was really GitHub Copilot. Cursor was starting to become prominent, but we wanted them to use their own IDE and for the solution that we applied to actually understand the code and the context that was in, which of course GitHub Copilot doesn't really do. And so we experimented with Augment, reached out and started setting up some POCs, and then that worked out really well. And so we applied that first, but then we had such great traction there that we wanted to look into all the other tools that were available, not just in code completion, but across other things. And so that's when, around the time when Alex joined, and so I tasked him and a few others to actually start investigating the whole landscape and just doing some comparison and research and experimentation. And our philosophy really is to not just leverage one tool, but actually figure out what tool is best for the job and to leverage all of them if there's ROI there. And it's like saying like, hey, instead of just saying just use hammers, like why not use screwdrivers and other things like where it makes sense. And so Alex then was tasked with the giant responsibility of looking at all these tools and figuring how to grade them and evaluate them, and then making the recommendation on how to bring them in. Um, yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
Alex, if you have any any thoughts on like when AI clicked for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm, as Dan mentioned, is relatively new to collectors. I mean, been at the company for about a year and a half. So my foray into AI started at a past company, actually back in maybe 2014 even. I had a colleague who built a neural network as a side project and shared it with our team. And this was one of the smartest people I've ever met. Um, and I had no idea what he was talking about, but it did pique my interest at the time, and so that was kind of my foray into the space. And then much later, had another colleague who was really on the forefront of the tooling aspect, and I would say that was when it kind of really clicked working with this individual that these tools were going to become a part of our everyday workflow, and a big part would be picking the right tool for the right job, just like any other software problem. Um, and so now at Collectors, the great thing is that really feel strong top-down encouragement from our leadership team, from Dan, to leverage AI in all ways possible. So sort of taking it upon myself to bring some method to the madness because there's a lot out there. Yeah, I think there's also a lot of opportunity. So yeah, excited to
Nice.
be here today and talk through it.
Yeah, we're going to get into that method, and I think that's the part that a lot of folks would be really interested in. I think there is just a wealth of options, a wealth of tools out there, and finding the right one for your use case is obviously important, but also assessing them against each other and trying to kind of pick through that and kind of sift through the noise is something that a lot of folks I think are grappling with. So I'm excited to see how you attack that problem. Before we do, you mentioned top-down leadership support, and this has been a real theme for me recently. I think that, like with any technology initiative, but especially with these, with the level of hype that there is around AI, getting that kind of support is really important. But there's obviously a darker side to that support. You can kind of see the rise of the mandate. These tools being kind of thrust upon maybe more skeptical engineers. I think a lot of folks tuning in today have probably come across this sort of scenario in some way or another. Dan and Alex, I know you're going to walk us through kind of what that scenario might look like and how you might deal with it. Do you want to fire up your slides, Dan, and walk us through it?
Sure, let's do it. All right, let me just see here. All right, so just a quick disclaimer on all this. This is going to be a little bit like an SNL skit, a bit cringy, loosely based on real life, and poorly rehearsed. So please be gentle with your booze. All right, Great news, everyone. I have discovered how to ship twice the features with half the engineers. It's called math and AI.
Amazing. While you were discovering math, I discovered experimental design and security reviews.
Love that for you. Today, I'll be playing your boss's boss's boss. My KPI is headcount divided by hype.
And I'll be playing your reality check with benchmarks, constraints, and how we actually tested tools instead of reading the internet comments.
See, this is why you don't have a ticket on my hype train.
I prefer it when a train's on the rails anyway.
All right, Alex. Let me tell you how I'm going to blow the board's minds with my presentation for my super smart AI plan. It's not actually that I need your opinions, but let's hear them anyway. So, real talk. Every board deck now has an AI slide, and I want ours to say, we replaced engineering with a TI-82.
Okay, well, it's also worth mentioning we responsibly increased velocity. We ran a structured bake-off across AI coding approaches because people were asking a real question. Can these tools help us ship faster without breaking everything? And also because you kept sending me Jarvis memes at 2 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, Jarvis would have replied.
He did. He said, please add acceptance criteria.
All right, so catch me back up. I remember you telling me about two different buckets of AI coding tools, but then I got an interesting TikTok notification on my phone.
So we compared two philosophies. The first, augmenters. Think JetBrains and VS Code extensions like Cursor and Augment. Human in the driver's seat, AI copilot. Two, autonomous agents. Think Devin. You prompt a task, it plans, codes, tests, opens PRs, the whole loop.
Gotcha. So one is Iron Man's suit, and the other is Jarvis with a GitHub login.
We did an apples to apples trial. Real engineers, real code, real deadlines. We scored things like functional performance, ease of rollout, security and compliance, and vendor stability. We also rebuilt real apps with each tool. Then we bundled everything up and merged the results into a recommendation.
I had a super important role in this too, approving the expenses and periodically pinging Alex with any updates on Operation TI-82. Run me through it again. How did we do the comparisons?
So we ran it in three phases. Phase one, evaluate static attributes, pricing, docs, integration, security, and risk. Phase two, conduct a series of case studies with each tool, real engineers, real prompts, deliverables aimed for production-ready quality. Phase three, combine the results into a criteria matrix, recommend a path forward.
Right. Also known as Alex made us do homework.
Also known as we didn't YOLO prod. Before touching real code, we looped in security for vendor risk, data boundaries, and environment isolation. Agents that can run shells or hit APIs can also delete things or leak secrets if you let them. So we decided not to let them.
Hey, that sounds like the same guardrails you'd put around me.
No comment?
Okay, so let's pretend that I haven't written code in like 4 years. Don't worry, I totally definitely have. Trust. Should I use these tools or should I keep copying and pasting from Stack Overflow?
So the trick isn't whether or not to use the tools, it's how and when. Here's what we found. Augmenters are immediate ROI. They fill the current workflow, make reviews faster, and reduce the work. They're ideal for refactors, tests, docs, and onboarding. Autonomous agents are high beta. They provide huge upside for greenfield prototypes and cross-repo analysis, but they can be brittle in an enterprise environment without guardrails. Security and observability are the choke points. If you can't see what an agent did, or you let it near prod without breaks, you'll spin cycles undoing. Costs are real, but manageable. IDE tools price per seat, Devin meters compute units. The value hinges on adoption and the tasks you pick. The org must adapt too. Coding style, test density, documentation, and CI policy all change when your teammate is probabilistic.
Okay, too many words. How do we AI now, Alex? Me want AI now.
We integrate it strategically. Use augmenters to bend the curve now, point agents at well-scoped explorations. Pair each with paved road scaffolds and observability.
Right. So how do we actually make these tools available to everyone?
Okay, so here's the plan. Near term, roll out augmenters to every developer in their IDE. Add test and dot coverage SLOs, measure results via Weave. Midterm, keep a small agents lab for autonomous classwork. Think prototypes, API integrations, cross-repo knowledge, gate with sandboxes, and PR-only output. Always treat AI output like junior engineer output. Review, test, monitor.
Okay, so like how many TI-82s does this add up to?
The square root of -1.
All right, smartass. Take some of that wit of yours and let's get these tools rolled out. So hopefully all of you bore with us with that. Let's pass it over to Alex, who can go a little bit more into our actual process of how we start evaluating these.
Cool, sure thing.
Thank you, guys. Very, very nicely done.
All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, so as Dan mentioned, thanks so much for bearing with us through that. Wanted to take us into a bit more of a practical flow of how we actually test new AI tools as they sort of come onto our desk. And you guys still see my screen? I got a flash. Okay, cool. I wanted to start with just introducing a couple of players throughout this process. The image on the left is representative of the sort of AI champion, AI tool champion, the person that really brings the new tool to the organization, wants to encourage adoption, wants to go through the whole trial process. The image on the right is representative of something that we call our AI committee internally. And this is really a group of people that are responsible for governance around the use of AI tools. So this group comes up with how do we want to test new AI tools, for instance? How do we want to evaluate new AI tools from a security perspective? And then what are some best practices around the actual use of these tools in our everyday workflows? So these are the players. But the whole process really starts with the ideation phase. And at this step, really both players that I mentioned are involved. And it starts with an idea. AI champion brings a new tool to the committee, says, hey, I want to try out this new tool. And what happens is we take that tool and we actually get a lot of these requests from various members throughout the organization, and we put them all into a funnel. And on the other end of that funnel, we organize the tooling into a couple of different buckets. Each bucket is made up of a problem statement, user stories, and key metrics. The whole reason for doing this is to create, again, some method to the madness. There's a lot of tools out there. We want to be able to take a bit more of a targeted approach to actually evaluating these tools and making sure that we're solving real problems and we're actually able to measure the outcome after using these tools. So here is an actual example of a real bucket that we have defined at Collectors. This one's around document generation. And the problem statement is software systems are not consistently documented, and the documentation we do have becomes stale quickly. A couple of user stories around that. I can generate documentation about my system. I can ensure the documentation is up to date, and then I can find answers to my questions using documentation. And then a few key metrics to track how effective we are at actually solving this problem. So we match tool with bucket or tool with problem statement to ensure, again, that we're taking a targeted approach to actually solving real problems that we have within the org. So the AI champion along with the AI committee at this point, kind of put their heads together and decide if we want to move forward with a trial of the new AI tool. And not only if, but kind of is it the right time to do so? And here's just a few guidelines that we follow in order to actually inform that decision. Generally, we want to take on one POC or trial in each bucket at a time. We found that this just helps to kind of keep the results clean so that tools aren't sort of muddling the results of other tools, and also prevents testing fatigue. If we're testing too many tools at the same time, people just kind of get a little bit worn out from the process because it is lengthy and does take a lot of time. We also want to ensure that there's initial interest in the tool from the get-go, just so that we can have sort of big bang for our buck, rather than rolling out the tool to a very small small group of folks. And then lastly, make sure it fits in the roadmap. This is just a pure prioritization decision. Just want to make sure that we have the time to dedicate enough to actually get good results from the trial with all the other stuff that we have going on. So once we sort of get the green light to actually test and trial a new AI tool, we enter into this static review phase. And this phase is led by the AI tool champion, the one that brought the tool to our desk in the first place. And they start by evaluating a few static criteria of the tool, including cost, documentation, how mature is the tool or the vendor. At this stage, we conduct a full-on security review in partnership with our security team, and come up with a set of mitigation strategies if there are risks that are found. We also contact the vendor at this stage, and at the end, hopefully get our hands on a few licenses to be distributed throughout the org for the trial. And then we enter into the evaluation period. This is the meat of the trial for sure. Again, led by the AI tool champion. We have the initial rollout and onboarding session just to make sure that folks can get up on the tool quickly. And then we also asked the AI tool champion to distribute a set of rules. And these are really a result of some of the risk mitigation strategies that came out of our security review. We just want to make sure we're being super safe during the trial period, really to protect our proprietary data more than anything else. So this is a real example from a trial that we did with Devin and Cursor. And just as an example, for Devin, we only want to grant write access in GitHub to repos with main branch protection rules. We don't want Devin committing to main. And then on the Cursor side, privacy mode is enabled, for instance, just to make sure that our data is safe. So once that sort of initial onboarding happens, we enter into the general use and case study phase. General use is just people using the tool every day. And then we also spin up a series of very targeted case studies that are meant to answer very specific questions that we want answered about the tool. Again, going back to the buckets that I mentioned earlier, we want to take a very targeted approach to solving real problems. So that's where the case studies really shine. Here's a couple of example case studies that I think we use both for Devin and Cursor when we trial those tools. Rebuilding a legacy admin, generating an architecture diagram related to SOC 2. Which API endpoint is being hit. This one was particularly interesting because the answer actually spanned across multiple code repositories. So we wanted to make sure that the tool was capable of sort of having that broader context across multiple repos. And then on the other end of each case study, we actually asked the participants to fill out this evaluation scorecard. And the whole point of this is to capture sort of a qualitative score on how well the tool performed for this particular use case. So just a couple of examples here. How much of the project is complete? How many more days do you feel you would need to get the site production ready? There's some questions in here about how intuitive the tool was to use. How do you like it in comparison to other AI tools that we maybe have as part of our stack? Again, really just trying to capture a general qualitative score for this particular use case that we can put into our repertoire. So here's a couple of examples of that. Once the evaluation period comes to a close, and generally these evaluation periods are anywhere from 1 to 2 months to 6 months or longer for some of our more complex use cases, I would say. We enter into this recommendation period, which again is a collaborative effort between the AI tool champion and our AI committee. And what it consists of is essentially, oh, you know what? I skipped one part. I want to go back real quick. During the evaluation period, we also host a series of feedback sessions. And these are aimed at everyone who's participating in the trial. And we actually record everything that's said during these feedback sessions. So here's an example as it relates to Cursor. I think this was as the trial was coming to an end, 1 out of 6 folks are going to really miss Cursor. Just a data point, to add into our repertoire. And then it looks like a survey was taken here. How many people will pay $10 a month for Augment? 6 out of 6. Great. $100 a month, 1 out of 6. That's interesting. How many people will pay $100 a month in max mode for Cursor? 1 out of 6. $50 a month, 5 out of 6. Okay, cool. The more data points, the better, I think, is the general sentiment here. Back into the recommendation period at the end of the trial, we basically take all the data that we've collected, which at this point is mostly qualitative, and we summarize it into a criteria matrix. And we're really evaluating across these 6 categories: functional performance, ease of implementation, scalability, security and compliance, vendor stability, cost benefit. Again, really trying to capture a summary of the qualitative experience that engineers had working on real projects. We combine that with quantitative data that we collect from platforms like Weave, for instance. This is an interesting graph that shows total code output over a period of time in comparison to code written with AI over that same time period. So now we have the qualitative bucket, and we can kind of show this quantitative piece on top. So we take all that in, come up with a document that has all of our results, and at the end make a recommendation. And at this point, it's really a sort of a collaborative effort between the AI tool champion and the AI committee to decide if we want to roll this tool out to the broader organization or we want to sunset it. That's really the crux of the evaluation, but just wanted to mention, or just wanted to close with a few key learnings that we have realized as we've walked through this process a number of times at this point. Number one, make sure your org can support the POC. These things take a lot of time, and they take resources and involve a lot of different people throughout the organization, like security, like legal. Speaking with the vendor, of course, takes time. So definitely don't want to feel too much fatigue from taking on too much at once. 2, POC for a while. Every tool is a little bit different, as I'm sure we all know, but that ramp up time is real. So we actually started with our trial periods being only about 1 to 2 months, and we've extended them to 6+ months because of that initial ramp up period. Distribute and empower. At first, we had a very small group of people who were actually who could actually bring one of these tools to the org and say, "Hey, we want to try this tool." But now the AI committee works to sort of bring best practices and a process and method to the madness of how we want to evaluate these tools, and therefore empowers anyone in the org to actually be the AI tool champion. And then lastly, the user is in control. This is just a reminder that the tools only get us so far. and that we, in parallel have to work on our prompt engineering, have to work on our context engineering, have to make sure that we're sort of abiding by best practices all around. So that's our process in a nutshell. Hopefully that was helpful for everyone.
Thanks, Alex. Like huge amount of work there, and really appreciate you sharing it. I felt a tremor of 100 people hitting screenshot when you shared that scorecard. I think that just like that ability to kind of like know what the questions you should be asking about these tools are is something that like no one has a like rubric for that stuff. We're all having to figure it out on the fly, and you've clearly spent a lot of time thinking about that stuff. I guess the kind of natural next question for me is like when you went through this process a few times, like what tools started to rise to the top? What did you see in terms of the tools that kind of immediately were kind of really flying through this process and really getting that adoption?
Yeah, sure. I can take a crack at that and maybe pass it over to Dan. But yeah, I mean, I think as we sort of alluded to in our skit earlier, we started out with sort of differentiating between sort of our augmenters as a tool type, I guess, and our autonomous agents. I think, and so I think to start, augment has always been one of our clear winners, especially in the augment space, the augmenters space. Excuse the pun. Um, as Dan mentioned, the context aware feature was really a game changer for us, and we saw increased adoption. We saw code output using AI tools increase dramatically after taking that tool on. In the other bucket, the autonomous agent bucket, we did some early on exploration of Devin and really enjoyed its capabilities. I think since then we've seen the gap close between something like Augment and Devin because, of course, Augment has autonomous agent capabilities now, and so I think we've leaned into that. I think kind of this having a single interface with a single tool will always be preferable to sort of having multiple tools that overlap.
Yeah, nice. I've got quite a few questions coming in. Keep them coming. We'll get to them towards the end of the session here. But the one I did want to just pick up straight away is Iago's about. He just wants to know like who's on the AI panel, and I guess I'm going to augment his question and ask like how do they self-select? Like how do you end up on that panel?
Yeah, so one of the interesting scenarios that we find ourselves in at Collectors is that there's so much that needed to be done, given that we were acquiring this public company to bring it private, and it was an older company. Was that there were just so many areas to focus on that each of the leaders coming in, we were all just really heads down on our area. And the board was more interested in just the transformation itself and the business story rather than, hey, like here, like AI is uh, disrupting everything. Why aren't we using AI? There was no mandate from the board or the CEO for me to leverage AI. It all came from me. And so in this case, I had the great position of being able to define what we do and how we do it in a way that will not tax the organization and also allows the teams to actually do it in a sustainable, controlled way. And so what I did was I handpicked individuals that were capable of envisioning what a future may look like with AI, but in a way that they could also build the bridge from where we are today to get there. And so I picked a few engineers from various teams. We have our internal platform teams, and so that's more of like DevOps, Cloud Ops, enterprise tools, corporate IT. So a few representatives from there, a few representatives from our customer-facing tools, our websites, our mobile apps, et cetera. A few people from the product teams, given that they are heavily incentivized to maximize velocity, but also they are more the voice of the customer and the business. And then a lot of the developers on the ground. And so Alex was one of the ones I was chosen because he is both a good entrepreneur, but also someone who represents both the customer teams as well as the voice of the engineers on the ground. And so there were a few people like that. And so even though I chose those people initially, it's not really all that formal. We just in general, taking a step back, we work like a startup. And so we took this old company that was very much an enterprise, big company, and just applied all of this startup culture into it. And so even things like this committee, I hold the ability to, like kick people out or add people in if I want to, but at the same time, I give everyone the autonomy to bring in people they think are relevant, and to create subgroups and subcommittees. And so that's what we ultimately did. We have a larger AI committee, which helps to just drive the overall strategy of AI across the organization, both in our products as well as our corporate tools. And then we form subcommittees. So Alex is the representative that's representing the coding tools and the developer augmentation. And so he has his own committee with a bunch of other people that are experimenting and looking into these things. So long-winded answer of how we arrived at that, but yeah.
No, I think people care. I think people are interested, how you do this stuff. Um, Matt, any kind of questions from you on what we've just heard from Dan and Alex?
Yeah, definitely. Dan, you mentioned at the beginning of all this, and we've alluded to it a couple of times, that um, something that had code base understanding and was effective contextually was something that you were kind of looking for. I'm curious, was that with the legacy code base in mind that you're inheriting? Or, and I'll kind of preface this that I think most people don't understand how quickly you can get there. Was it that the new code base was already sufficiently large and complex at that time?
For sure, it was both. And so we came in with there already being some software products and code base in place, of course, knowing that we needed to modernize it. But you can't modernize 35 years of code overnight or even in a year. And so we knew that we would have to somehow organize it enough to build on top of it, but that we would have to maintain it for some period of time and figure out how to interface with it in a way that doesn't topple the whole thing over. So you have, especially when you only have 11 software engineers, each one owned 3 to 5 different products areas, and they were building things independently. So now you add in more engineers, right? And we're doubling our team. And like I said, we're now at over 200.
Hmm.
But of that, about 100 of them are software engineers. But so now you have all these new software engineers coming in. To them, the new code we just built is pretty much the same as the legacy code. It's not documented. There's only one engineer who really understands it. They're busy running with their tickets and trying to continue to build more things. So what Augment allowed them to do is, regardless of whether it was legacy or new code, they could catch up quickly and add on to it and become an effective engineer within days. And this was hugely impactful. And so we saw, given that a lot of our new development was building atop the old code, but actually still new code, we saw that it was effective for both. But more importantly, it just made it so that it didn't matter whether it was old or new. They just became a very high impact engineer very rapidly.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And Alex, you kind of posed this question, can these tools help us ship faster without breaking everything? Um, I think we got a little glance of this when you were running through the demo, but I'm curious, what kind of metrics are you looking at when you talk about it coming to like ship faster? And I know this can be really hard to measure. So is this more about signal than something concrete for you?
I think it's both. I mean, I think that we try to make it concrete wherever we can.
Mm.
And luckily we have platforms like Weave to help us do that. I mean, the graph that I showed, I think is a perfect example of concrete data, really illustrating the increase in velocity, which is such a North Star metric that, as an engineering manager, um, that we're always sort of looking at. So that, yeah, and just to remind folks, that graph is actually showing total code output, in comparison to code output with AI tools. And we can actually break it down per AI tool to see which one's sort of contributing the most way, or which one's getting the most use. Um, so I think that's a great example of a concrete metric that we are bringing. Other concrete metrics like, just adoption rate, and even engagement rate. How long are folks actually staying engaged with the tool, or which pieces of functionality that are being used the most. And I guess on that topic, I'll actually have to mention that the vendors themselves have been great resources. In a lot of cases, we've been able to actually go to the vendor and say, hey, can you help us calculate ROI? Can you help us determine which features of the product are actually being used the most? And a lot of vendors actually have these metrics built into their web-based dashboards or whatever it is. So that part's been great. That's helped us to get as much of a concrete feel as we possibly can. And then, of course, we're doing all the other stuff, like the feedback sessions and the evaluation scorecards to get the qualitative pieces, which are, of course, more signal based.
One of the things that I kind of really caught on from the presentation was that you said that you rebuilt existing projects. It was what you decided to do during the evaluation period that I think was really important. And it may seem obvious, but we hear from a lot of other folks that they want to, evaluate on some open source code. Maybe you could speak to why it was important to you to evaluate in this way.
Yeah, totally. I think it all comes down to sort of this bucketing approach that I mentioned earlier, in that we started this whole process with identifying real problems that we wanted to solve. And sort of like, how do we track progress against those problems? So rather than starting with the tool, we started with the problem. Probably sounds familiar in conversations with many product managers over the years, but yeah. So by starting with the problem, we were able to, when evaluating a tool, we're able to actually spin up real use cases that are analogous to that problem, that address that problem head on. And so we can take that targeted approach and we can measure our effect, the effect that the tools are having.
So it allows you to get a much clearer read based on what would actually be meaningful to you. I guess the main thing is that you have to be willing to make the security and legal investment up front to go and do it on your own code or things that look a lot like your own code so that you can be comfortable evaluating vendors in that way, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And yeah, that was a point that I hope got across during the presentation, is that these trials don't come for free. They're definitely they definitely take a lot of time and resources to execute properly.
Yeah, you also called out, Alex, that autonomous agents are good for Greenfield. I'm curious, did you try some of the same use cases with the agents as the augmenters, and maybe looking forward, do you think that the autonomous agents will carry out specific tasks in the software development lifecycle, like PR review and failure analysis, and that actually there's not overlap, but these two are just responsible for different things?
Um, I think the agents will continue to take a bigger and bigger role, to be honest with you. And I mean, we've seen that as underlying models have gotten better and better, but we've also seen that as we as users have gotten better at using the tools. We now have what we call memory banks, where they are sort of AI written documentation that are basically best practices on how to write code in our ecosystem. And these memory banks are growing. Every time we use the tool, if we actually instruct the agent to say, hey, if there's a learning here, put it in this document so that next time you run, you can sort of ingest this document into your context, and abide by these same learnings that have been reported over time. And so that memory bank is growing and growing and growing. And as it grows, we found that the agents have become much more produce much higher quality code, more in line with our design principles and internal best practices, but also just just more effective in executing the task in all ways. So I think and just to clarify, I mean, the augmenters, I don't know if there's an augmenter out there who only just does sort of the augmentation, like code completion piece. I believe all of them are kind of moving into the agent space. So again, like we've actually begun to shift towards a single tool. Right now, it's primarily Augment that sort of serves that augmenter functionality, code completion, et cetera, but also the agentic autonomous functionality for us, which has been hugely beneficial.
Nice. Alex, I'm going to try and like batch a few of these audience questions up and try and get through them before we're at the hour here. So there's a couple here that are kind of all linked in that they're just curious about the kind of way that you consolidate your metrics. Like, there's a question here from George, is there a single platform that the team uses as a one-stop shop? But there's also just like a couple of questions about like, how did you build in usage or adoption metrics alongside really what looks like some really in-depth qualitative analysis of these tools?
Yeah. I would say that the metrics really come from three sources, I would say. Again, Weave has been a really valuable platform for us just in capturing sort of that quantitative piece across the board. Number two, we really take the time to work with the vendor to like almost offload the work onto them to give us to tell us how well their product is working for us essentially. And then three, and this is more of the qualitative side, that's all been internal, just based on use case, based on our own needs, coming up with sort of that evaluation matrix that we follow and identifying sort of the 6 categories that are most important to us. So combining those 3 sources and throwing it all into the bucket is sort of how we do it.
Yeah, just to build on that. So we've mentioned Weave a few times. It's workweave.dev is the site. Weave is, of course, another product. And so it's got a little confusing, might be hard to find. So workweave.dev. But what it does is exactly what Alex said. It aggregates data from all these different sources. And so thanks to the Augment team and others who actually produce us the stats around their tool and how we leverage it, Weave can combine all of that and help us to look at the analytics. And so the graph that Alex showed earlier isn't one example, but you can actually break it down. So we actually tag all of our different developers and their levels and their teams. And we don't use it as a way to analyze performance of individual engineers. We actually use it to look at the tools and just the issues that we have with code bases, just so we can help to better support those teams and figure out, do we need to just like burn that code base down, start new over, et cetera. And so when used appropriately, Weave is actually a very powerful tool for the developers and for the teams to actually advocate for certain types of changes. So in this case, this was a slide that we decided to leave out just because it muddies a bit of the narrative of that earlier presentation. But I think based on the question, it's important to see you can actually use it to determine how much are you saving in terms of productivity across all of these tools. So the big important thing here is that it aggregate all the information to show that we're getting 6% of our code base written by these AI tools. And if you estimate how many days those tools have been used, how many engineers are using them, and then this is just a placeholder number for how much the engineers cost. But you can get a directional sense of how much you're saving. And so I use this actually to justify to my CFO, we want to use not just one of these tools, but all of these tools, and we have demonstrated actual quantifiable ROI. And so he signed off right away, and we were able to get the contracts. But it's thanks to Augment and others who are producing the data for us, which actually allows us to then use them to subscribe. But also, as a leader, it helps me to see which tools are more effective when and in which code bases, what context. So highly recommend. This isn't the only platform. There are other platforms that we're actually also evaluating at this point. But just to use these platforms in this way, it definitely helps with the evaluation.
Yeah, I can feel 1,000 Weave slides entering their way into slide decks across the country. We've got a few minutes left here. There's one here, Dan, that I definitely wanted to get to for you. Is Pete was asking, Like, how have you built organizational structures to encourage devs to share knowledge with their peers? How do you use tools in certain code bases, tips and tricks? This is definitely something that's like coming up a lot that I'm hearing is like, how do you start to show and tell with these tools and really start to get that kind of peer-to-peer learning cycle going?
Yeah, definitely. Very important. Very good point. That's definitely necessary for any sort of change management. So I treated it the same way that I treated change management in general, because of course AI is just one change that we made across all these different changes that need to happen. And I left it out because it wasn't as important. But one of the headlines of all these changes was that the company was acquired for $850 million in 2021 to bring it from public to private. With these changes, with a lot of the talented engineers like Alex, 12, 14 months later, the company's valuation went up to $4.3 billion. But that was because we were very mindful about change management, not just within tech, but across the whole company. The best way to get better adoption of changes in general is to find champions across the different teams that need to make the change and empower them. And so what we did was we started to form these group of augment advocates, code tool advocates, AI advocates, and had them talk to each other. And then we would train them or have them talk directly with Matt's team and the augment team or the various vendors, have them be part of the POC so they know the pros and cons, have them work directly with Alex so they understand the process we went through and why we arrived at these tools. And then they socialize it. And they were the ones who actually then became an extension of me and Alex and trained all of their teams in order to use this. And then that just became exponential in terms of the adoption as people were teaching each other things. And then we gave forums. We actually, my chief of staff, Miho, would actually set up these Friday lectures that were optional for engineers to come and learn how to use these AI tools. And I would regularly talk in the all hands about how it's important for all of us to lean into these tools because really, if you don't lean into them now, it's like as if you were to not lean into robotics back in the day and just say like, oh, we're never going to use robotics. Like that's kind of a silly thing. The world at some point, all of us will be using AI in some way, and so it's best to learn how to use it effectively now while still it's in its infancy rather than later on when you're going to have to learn so much in order to just catch up. And so with all of these little things, people were starting to adopt it. We started to see the changes in Weave. For the teams that weren't, we were able to figure out why and then figure out, okay, what's the best way to get through to them to help them to be empowered to use these tools. But so it's a lot of little things, but it's just a matter of being mindful of the culture of the company and then trying to shift it with the use of a lot of these tools.
Nice. Thank you, Dan. Right, that is all we've got time for today. I want to just thank everyone for tuning in, whether on Zoom here or on the Augment YouTube channel. I just want to say a big thanks to Dan and Alex for kind of all the work you put into presenting this stuff, walking us through the way that you assess these tools, and also just for your, high class improv skills. So thank you for kind of all the work you've done there. Matt, anything last things to say on this one?
No, I'd echo that. Thanks very much to Dan and Alex. And for those that are in New York this week for the event, looking forward to seeing you if you're here.
Yeah, come say hi. Me and Matt will be hanging around. And then, yeah, I really look forward to seeing all of you hopefully this time next week for session 3 of 5. We've got Angela Daniels from DXC coming on onto the show to talk about how they kind of crunched what would have been a 1-year client project down to 10 days work from using a variety of tools. It's a really good case study. She's going to really walk us through some of the stuff they've done. I'm really excited about it. So yeah, come join us again this time next week. But thanks again, Dan, Alex, and Matt. See you all soon.
Awesome.